So there may be a few more people join us, but good morning, everyone.
Sure.
My name is Ashley Alford-Glantz. I'm the president of the Putnam County Chamber of Commerce, and I'm very thankful to all of you for calling in today to learn more about how the COVID vaccine and how that affects you as an employer. And I'm very excited to have my good friend Brian Moore here. He's a partner at Dinsmore and Shohl, and he's going to be able to answer any of your questions and also give a brief presentation about this. He is a partner at Dinsmore and focuses on labor and employment law. So he is the guy to know the answers to all of your burning questions. Today, we're actually kicking off a series of mini webinars. This is sponsored by Toyota, and each Friday we're going to be offering you some different webinars focusing on, COVID-19 and recovery, as well as just keeping you informed of the information that's coming out pertaining to, second round PPPs, CARES funding, as well as next Friday, we're going to be talking about how to utilize social media to build back up your business base, and just a couple other things. So we're really thankful for Toyota for sponsoring this mini webinar series. If you want to participate in all of them, you do have to register every week for each different one. And you'll receive the link prior to the webinar starting. So like I mentioned before, Brian is a partner at Dinsmore and focuses on labor and employment law. He's also a member of our board of directors. So we're really thankful to him for donating his time and his talents today to cover this topic with you and answer any questions. As we go through the webinar, if you do have any questions and you have the ability, please type them into the chat. And once Brian's done with his presentation, I will read those questions to him. Remember to keep yourself muted just in case there's any background noise. And if we cannot answer your question today, we'll make sure that we get you an answer as promptly as possible. Or if you think of any other questions after the close of today's webinar, feel free to email those to me at either my email address, a.alford@putnamcounty.org, or chamber@putnamcounty.org, and I will get with Brian to get you an answer on that. Thank you guys all for tuning in today, and we are recording this webinar, so if you want a copy of it to go back and listen to, or if you know of any other chamber members that just weren't able to commit to this time frame to learn more about this topic and they would like us to share it with them, I'll be happy to do that. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Ashley. And if anyone has any problems hearing me or anything like that, just yell at us and let me know. As Ashley said, I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I practice throughout West Virginia and Kentucky. I also currently serve on the Putnam Chamber Board of Directors and currently serve this year as the treasurer. As Ashley indicated, we're going to be talking about vaccine issues surrounding COVID today, and I'm coming up myself on 20 years of practicing law in May, and to be quite honest with you, it had gotten a little routine and I don't want to say not challenging, but it was, I was getting pretty good at it and not much challenge until March of last year when, COVID hit in full force, and I felt like a brand new lawyer again, scurrying around trying to answer questions in real time about these brand new legal issues that came up. And then now here we are 10 months later, and we have a vaccine, which is great news, but that brings with it some more legal questions, especially in the employer arena. And so that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes, and then we'll of course be happy to answer any questions you have. Before we get into the vaccine, I just want to give a very brief update on the COVID emergency leave laws. You may recall last April, Congress enacted emergency paid sick leave for employees affected by COVID. It was the first time ever that the federal government had enacted paid sick leave laws or required paid sick leave laws from employers. The update on that is that those emergency leave laws expired on December 31st, 2020, so employers are no longer required to provide that emergency leave. If employers voluntarily want to still provide that leave between now and March 31st, 2021, they still can take advantage of the payroll tax credits. So really the cost would still be borne by the federal government on that. Now, the reason we're here today is to talk about the vaccine issues, and especially in the employment arena. And the number one question, of course, that we're all curious about is, can employers require the vaccine or make it mandatory that employees get the vaccine? The short answer is yes, they can mandate the vaccine, which, again, as with everything with COVID, the laws are a little relaxed. The employment laws have been a little relaxed. Privacy laws are a little bit relaxed. Traditionally, that might not have been the same answer, but now it is. That the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has come out with guidance, and they've said that employers can mandate the vaccine. There are at least two exceptions that you want to watch out for on that. And it's if an employee were to say, I have a disability and need an accommodation on this issue, or if I have a sincerely held religious practice and need an accommodation on this issue. And we'll get into those in just a couple of minutes. But in general, employers can mandate the vaccine. Question two, can employers require an employee to show them proof that they've received the vaccine? And the answer to that, again, is yes, you could require proof of the vaccine. Where this starts getting a little bit trickier is, can the employer administer the vaccine on its premises to employers? And yes, you can do that. The vaccine's not a medical examination as defined by the ADA. However, if you start asking screening questions, soliciting information from employees about, do you have any disability or health condition that might be impacted, by getting the vaccine, then you are conducting a medical examination at that point, and you have to show that your inquiry is job related and consistent with business necessity, which you may very well be able to do because the health and safety of all employees is at stake here. But just keep in mind that the disability laws start coming into play when you start asking questions of employees. If you start asking, well, why didn't you get the vaccine? Or do you have some kind of health condition that prevents you from getting the vaccine? Now you're getting into a little bit more of a protected area. And you can still do it. You just have to make sure that you have a good reason for doing it. Next question. If the employer requires vaccinations, how should they respond if the employee says, hey, I've got a medical condition, I can't get this vaccine? And the answer is, you have to engage in an interactive process with the employee and discuss, is there a reasonable accommodation to this? Would requiring would the accommodation I provide for them, which might be not getting the vaccine, would that provide an undue hardship on me as an employer? And an undue hardship could be shown by, again, if we're going to jeopardize the health and safety of all other employees, you might be able to argue that. The counter argument to that, however, is, let's say 90% of your workforce got vaccinated and only one person refuses to get the vaccine, then are you really jeopardizing, the health and safety of the workforce if everyone else is vaccinated? It's just an interesting question. I think the laws are going to be a little bit more lenient on employers in all of these areas. So I wouldn't be unduly concerned with the risk of all of this. But, if you have one holdout, then could you argue that the rest of the employment workforce is, their health is at stake if that person didn't get vaccinated when they're all vaccinated? You might not be able to argue that. Same thing with religious accommodation. If an employee says, I can't do this because of my religion, it can't be a made up thing. It has to be a sincerely held religious belief. So, you would be permitted to say, well, okay, could you show me some documentation of that? And maybe they have, someone from their church or something provide them with the documentation. As an employer, you usually don't want to press those things too hard. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they have a sincerely held religious belief. Now, that doesn't get them off the hook necessarily, because you may still determine that I don't want them in the workplace without the vaccine. And so the question is, can we make some other accommodation? You can't just fire people. You got to do the interactive process and figure out if there's another solution. Maybe the solutions that they can work at home or something like that. They don't need to be in the office, and that satisfies everyone. You just have to work through the process. If you can't find a solution, then yes, you could, fire them even at that point or exclude them from the workforce if you thought this is going to create some kind of health hazard or safety hazard to other employees. So, yes, you can mandate vaccines, but the gray area comes in where people refuse to do it because of disability or religious accommodation issues. And so that's a little bit more of a sensitive area. Would I require it? No, I wouldn't necessarily do it. I still think there's risks with these religious issues and disability issues, but I think a lot of it depends on your industry too. Obviously in the healthcare industry, you've got a lot stronger argument. And maybe in the restaurant industry, you've got a lot stronger argument. These people are face to face with the public constantly. And so you have a lot stronger argument that we've got to have this mandating that the vaccine takes place. Facebook came out and said they're not requiring their employees to get the vaccine. A lot of my clients have said they're not necessarily requiring it. The next issue that comes up are privacy concerns. So, as you know, like the state is going through and determining what kind of the pecking order of who gets the vaccine in the state. And I had a client reach out to me recently. It was a banking client and said that the government had contacted them and said bank tellers and people who deal with the public face to face or maybe in line soon for the vaccine, please provide us with their name, address, date of birth, etc. And the question was, should I get the employee's consent to do this? And my answer was yes. I think that would be a best practice to have the employees consent to that. And sure enough, several employees said, no, I don't want you sending my information to the state. I'm not, going to get the vaccine and I don't want them to have my private information. So I think always a best practice to still look out for your employees' privacy interests in way that when you receive requests from any government entity like that. There was a big story about under the Trump administration, the CDC was asking for all kinds of personal information about people and whether they've been vaccinated and things like that. I don't know if that's going to ease up under the Biden administration or not, but there was a lot of concern again about these privacy interests and the government having all your personal data and things like that. So just be on the lookout for those privacy concerns. Let's see if there's anything else before I move off of that issue. Okay. Next issue is just, I think, a lot of you are probably curious about how has COVID impacted lawsuits and employment litigation and things like that. And I have already seen a fair number of lawsuits that have come in mentioning COVID in one way or another. And a lot, there were a lot of layoffs last spring and summer. And I've seen lawsuits where someone says, well, you claim that you laid a bunch of people off for COVID, but you took advantage of that to get rid of me as an older employee or me because of my race. And then I've also seen lawsuits where COVID is directly involved in the lawsuit and the person says the employer fired me because I got COVID. And so it's a disability case. They thought just because I had COVID, I had a disability and they fired me. And we can expect more of these types of cases, I think, in the next few years to come. Other things, occupational exposure type cases and things like that. It's really, all of this is a no-win situation. There's no right or wrong answer to any of this. And going back to the vaccine issue, if you require the vaccine, there's still going to be employees who legally challenge you on that, even though the EEOC has said we can mandate it. You're still likely to get challenges on that from employees. So again, depending on the industry you're in, I wouldn't necessarily make it a requirement. Certainly you can help and you can assist employees if they want to get the vaccine. But I'm not sure that all industries should mandate it. That's just kind of my personal opinion more than my legal opinion, because legally you can do it. With that said, I want to open it up to any questions you have, and you don't have to restrict them to the vaccine issues. It could be anything kind of COVID and employment law related.
Thank you, Brian. There is one question already in the queue, and it does have to do with liability for the employer should the employee have a reaction to the vaccine.
Well, that's a great question. So I assume that if you're the employer and you're going to administer the vaccine, you probably have the employee sign off on some kind of paper releasing you from liability for that kind of stuff. I think that would be the best practice. Does a release, I mean, that brings up the question, does a release get you off the hook? Not necessarily. I mean, yeah, it probably would, given these circumstances that we're dealing in this area where all of the laws have been relaxed. And if you had a release signed by the employee that said, I understand and I'm not going to sue the employer for receiving the vaccine, even if I have side effects from it, it probably will get you off the hook. It doesn't mean that somebody still can't sue you though, which is in and of itself a giant headache. So, I mean, if I had a choice, I would have a third party administer the vaccine. That gives you a little bit more separation. I'm sure that third party and would still have somebody sign a release as to them and things like that, but that might give you a little bit more separation. So in general, I wouldn't be unduly concerned about that. You know, the side effects so far that we've seen is, you know, probably less than 1% of people. And then if you had them sign a document saying you're not going to be held responsible for it, I think you'd be pretty safe in general.
Okay. Next question is, could workers' compensation come into play with COVID?
That's a great question. It possibly could, because someone could claim, I got COVID in the workplace while I was doing my job, and file a workers' comp claim over that. There's been so many novel workers' comp claims over the years, and I believe there was even a case somewhere where someone sustained a bee sting, and the question was, and they had some kind of allergic reaction and filed a workers' comp claim. And the big argument was that in the scope of employment? And I forget what the court ruled on that, but if you, for example, are a caretaker that has to go into people's homes or something like that, and you're doing your job and that's where you got stung by the bee, I think that's the court came down and said, you are doing your job, you're in the course of employment there. And the employer argued, well, no, this is kind of more like just a random occurrence that could happen in everyday daily life. It's not in the course of employment. COVID, I think, is a little bit easier situation than that novel example. I think if it's in the workplace and the person could show they got it in the workplace, then I think they could have a workers' comp claim, or at least try to file one.
This next question is a little bit similar to that, and it's basically, do you face liability from vaccinated employees about unvaccinated employees?
Yeah, that's the careful balancing act. So if, you know, and supposedly if they're vaccinated, you know, they've got a 95% chance they shouldn't get it. But that the balancing act is an employee comes to you and says, well, I'm not getting the vaccine, I've got a disability, I can't get it. But then somebody else, maybe it's not an employee, maybe it's a customer, somebody sues you and says you're being negligent by not having your employees vaccinated. So that's the careful balancing act. That's why I say this whole ordeal with COVID is there's no guarantee one way or another that you're not going to be sued by somebody as an employer. So that may, you know, you have to decide, I think, where's the risk? Is the risk in employees protesting and complaining about having us mandating the vaccine, or are we more worried about the risk coming from people saying you were negligent by not having your employees vaccinated?
Thank you for answering those. That is all that I have in the queue. I'll give another second if anybody else would like to ask an additional question. Just remember to type it in the chat. If you can't type it in the chat, just unmute yourself and we can go from there. Brian, and while I'm waiting a second, I'm assuming these rules are just, for private businesses, not anything that would be, you know, quasi-government or anything like that. This would just be cover private businesses, correct?
Yeah, in general, I mean, similar rules is probably still apply with public employees, although public employees in general have greater privacy rights and constitutional rights than private employees. But there's nothing in the EEOC guidance that limits, this to private employers. I mean, I think public employers could require the vaccine and things like that. A public employer just has to remember that their employees have greater constitutional rights and privacy rights.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions on that, feel free to follow up with me at any time later or anything, because private versus public employers is a little bit tricky.
Yeah, this person wasn't the reason I asked that question. They were not able to attend today, but they had mentioned to me that they thought their rules would be different than. So I just wanted to get that on your radar, just in case she does have additional questions as we move forward move forward through the vaccination process. So she was.
Some of these questions will become more prevalent in a few months when it's more widely available, because right now it's not widely available. So a lot of these issues haven't surfaced yet.
Yeah, I do think I'll get a lot of requests for replay of this webinar once it does become a little bit more accessible to folks.
In 3 months from now, you may want to just do it again, because who knows what issues have come up in the meantime.
That's true. I think sometimes, especially with a lot of our COVID issues, I've had to redo the same thing a couple times, or things change, specifically with the funding sources. The rules have changed between, the initial release and now the secondary release. Rules have changed and stuff. So we're always watching for those things. And so we'll make sure to keep the chamber members as up to date as possible through this process. But there are no other questions, just some thank yous in the chat. So thank you, Brian, on behalf of some of our attendees today. And thank you all for attending. Again, I did record this session, so if you want to come back and listen to it later, just send me an email and I can send you the link once we've got it uploaded. And then we will be hosting our second mini webinar series next week. It's going to be on utilizing social media to build back up your business base with one of our chamber members from Integrated Marketing Solutions. And if you think of any questions after the fact for Brian, feel free to email those to me at chamber@putnamcounty.org, and I will get with Brian to get you an answer for that. And again, Brian, thank you for donating your time. We really appreciate you taking the time to provide this information to your fellow chamber members, and we hope that everyone has a wonderful and safe weekend, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you guys. Have a great weekend.